They framed me, they fired me, and that's how they flipped themselves into a divorce, a prison sentence, and a handful of deportations. I have a crazy story to tell. It all started when I got wrongly blamed for something at work and lost my job. But that wasn't the end of it. My situation triggered a series of events that completely shook up the staff at my workplace. Managers got fired or transferred, the head honcho got fired and divorced, one manager got in trouble with the FBI and got arrested, and some workers even got deported. It was like a domino effect of chaos. I used to work at a fancy restaurant that belonged to a big company with lots of different restaurants. I worked there for about 3.5 years before they fired me, but let me tell you about my job first. I did a bit of everything at that place. From the moment I started, I was eager to learn as much as I could. Whenever I wanted to try something new, I'd bug the managers until they let me. I began as a server, but I ended up doing all sorts of jobs like taking orders, greeting customers, mixing drinks, helping out at events, handling special orders, and making deliveries. My main goal was to work as many hours as possible. I earned around $12 per hour, but it varied depending on whether I was working as a bartender or server and getting tips. Eventually, the managers realized that I excelled in one of the non-tipped roles. I was so good at it that they decided to let me oversee the team working in carryout, catering, and deliveries, even though it wasn't an official supervisor position. I knew this change would mean fewer hours for me since I'd only be working in one department, so I talked to management and negotiated a raise of about $1.50 per hour to compensate for the added responsibilities. They agreed to the pay raise, and I was happy with it. I wasn't trying to maximize my earnings. I just wanted to cover my bills and have a bit of spending money. I lived in Chicago, where taxes were high, and in Illinois, where they were even higher, so making ends meet was tough while still having some money for fun. I'm not someone who needs a lot to be happy. A video game could keep me entertained for months, maybe even years. Plus, I had a pet to take care of, which added to my expenses. After I became the unofficial supervisor, I also started dating someone, which meant I was going out more and spending money on dates. But with my job and some careful money management, I could handle it all. Money wasn't the problem, it was the high turnover among managers. New managers often didn't understand our department or how important our hours were to us. One day, we heard that our boss was going to be fired and a new boss was coming in. They said this new boss was really good at fixing restaurants. We looked him up online and found out he had been arrested for hurting someone. His name was Harvey. When Harvey started, things changed a lot. One of our best managers quit because she didn't want to work with him. She warned us that Harvey might do bad things like make rude comments or even hurt people. After she left, Harvey started bringing in new managers he knew from before. Soon, almost all the old managers were gone, except one named Frito, who managed the kitchen. Frito had been around since I started working there. He seemed to change his behavior depending on who was in charge. It was like he adapted to survive, but I couldn't help but see him as someone who sucked up to whoever was in power. Harvey never officially replaced our department manager, so things ran without much oversight, except for me as the unofficial supervisor. We didn't have someone always telling us what to do, which was nice. Our department had some small problems, but overall, it ran smoothly. Since we didn't have our own manager, we had to call for one whenever we needed approval for something. Frito would usually come since the kitchen was nearby. Eventually, the new managers started to think of Frito as our manager too. But the hourly workers still saw me as their supervisor. So when Frito wanted to make changes that would hurt us, the team looked to me to fix things or talk to Frito to let us do things our way, which had been working fine. For many months, Frito and I disagreed a lot. We argued about how important hours were for the workers in our department. Frito thought we should rely on tips like servers do, but most of our orders were through Grubhub, which doesn't give tips. We didn't get many delivery orders, and the tips we did get were usually small, so dividing them among us didn't help much. It was clear Frito didn't understand our situation. Then we had a meeting with Harvey, Frito, and all the workers. They said we could speak up about any problems without fear of punishment. So the workers spoke up. They said Frito was cutting our hours even though he wasn't our real boss. When they mentioned hiring a new manager, they suggested I take over since I had been supervising them and things were going well. I was also the one who helped with the schedules because I knew everyone's availability. I could tell right away that Harvey and Frito didn't like the idea. Even though they didn't say it, I could see in their faces that they wanted to get rid of me. I knew my time there was coming to an end, and I'd likely lose my job soon. They made a lot of promises to us, They said they wouldn't cut our hours and that they'd stop sending most of us home early, leaving just one person to clean and close up, which was too much for one person to do safely. They promised that we'd work the hours we were scheduled for. We weren't asking for much. We usually had 3 or 4 people scheduled to work, so they could send 2 home early, but they had to keep at least 2 people to close properly. They promised they'd always have at least 2 closers. About a week later, they went back on their promise and started sending most of us home early again every night. One night, after a big catering event, there was a ton of cleanup left, and I was supposed to close. When Frito tried to send everyone home except me, I reminded him about the promise they made to us in the meeting, but he just told me to stop complaining and threatened to replace me if I kept talking about it. I realized he was trying to get rid of me, so I stopped arguing and started cleaning. I ended up working late and got overtime pay, but I also got in trouble for it because we need manager approval for overtime. When I refused to sign the write-up, explaining why I had to stay late, I was allowed to leave without signing, but only because the HR rep wasn't on Harvey's side. Skipping ahead to the day I got fired, I want to mention that I always came in an hour early for work. Food was pricey in Chicago, but luckily we could have free soup and bread at our job. So I'd come in early to have some soup and bread for lunch before my shift. On this day, I walked into the kitchen to get my soup, and a line cook told me there was a canceled dish that Frito said to give away. He said it was free for anyone. It happened to be my favorite, so I happily took it. Later, both Harvey and Frito came to me, asking if I had ordered that dish. I explained the line cook gave it to me for free since it was canceled. Frito acted like he didn't know, and Harvey accused me of theft. He told me to finish the food and leave, saying it was my last meal there. I tried to explain, offering to go to the kitchen with them to talk to the cook, but they didn't listen. When we got to the kitchen, the cook had already left. I hadn't a choice but to gather my things, say goodbye, and leave. As I left, I told my coworkers in the afternoon shift exactly what happened. They were shocked and upset to see me leave. On my way out, I stopped by the accounting office to collect any tips I might have missed. I had a feeling to record what happened, so I put my phone in my pocket with the camera on. Though the video was dark, I captured Harvey and Frito talking about getting rid of me since the department meeting. When I knocked on the door, they quickly quieted down. I asked for my tips, and they gave them to me from the safe. Despite being angry, I kept calm and thanked them for the opportunity to work there before leaving. Outside, I made sure to record the restaurant sign before heading out. Restaurant jobs can be tough, especially with management problems like these. You learn to always cover your own ass. It's true for most jobs, but something was just telling me I would need this all later. If I was being accused of theft, I wanted to be able to prove it wasn't true if it ever came up in future job interviews, which is exactly what happened and where this all started going nuclear. On the train ride home, I sent some messages and made some posts on some local groups on Facebook saying that I had just been fired and that I was looking for a job as quickly as possible. By the time I got off at my stop, I had already set up an interview for later that day. I was offered the job about 5 minutes into the interview, but after going over the details, it didn't sound like it was for me, so I turned it down. I interviewed a few other places and found one that was a damn good fit with a hefty pay increase compared to my previous job, and I wouldn't have to deal with customers. It was an auditing job for a logistics company. However, during the interview with the manager of this job, he mentioned he had already called my previous place of employment and spoken with the general manager, Harvey. Harvey had told him that I had been fired for theft. Luckily for me, the manager I was interviewing with asked me to tell him more about that, and he was willing to let me pull out my phone and find the recording. I asked if the voice in the video was the same as the one he spoke on the phone with. It was. That was confirmation enough for him that I hadn't made a fake video. He listened to the 2 managers in the video admit that they had set me up and watched to the end when I showed the front of the restaurant complete with the logo and name. The manager interviewing me, who we'll start calling Dean, hired me immediately and asked me to send him the recording. I did. I thought that was the end of it. About 7 months later, after settling into this job quite nicely, HR sent out a welcome to all our new team members email, which listed all the newest hires, some facts about them, and had pictures of them all. They sent these out every time they hired a new round of people. One of them, Thomas, was a former coworker who worked with me at the restaurant. We had worked at the host stand together, so I was pretty glad to see someone I knew and liked coming onto the team. I saw at his desk and went and said hello and asked why he left the restaurant. He hadn't left willingly. He'd been laid off because the company was under investigation. It had started as a relatively small matter. The corporate entity that owned the restaurant chain had received an email with an attached video, spy video that had been filmed from inside my pocket. That was cause enough for corporate to send someone to investigate internally. Thomas was pretty surprised that I hadn't heard anything about it since there had been numerous attempts to get in touch with me. As soon as he said that, I logged into the old email I had used when I first applied for the job at the restaurant. I had at least 24 emails asking me to come in to discuss my employment and termination. I never replied, I just didn't care enough anymore. I'd also changed my number since then, so they hadn't been able to contact me by phone. Thomas continued explaining that before corporate had sent someone, Harvey and Frito had talked with my department and tried to offer them all a small pay increase to spin corporate a story about how I was incompetent at my job and failed to live up to my duty. The day the corporate auditor showed up, there had been a small exodus of people from my old department. They quit on the spot in front of the lady from corporate. Let's call her Audrey, and made sure to rat out Harvey and Frito before leaving. Strike one for both of them. Strike two came a couple of days after Audrey showed Harvey and Frito the recording that had kicked all of this off. They denied it vehemently, but there was no mistaking Harvey's voice. It's unique. Not only that, but the video also picked up their voices and mine when we shook hands and had a friendly parting of the ways, which was something they had already bragged about to Audrey, thinking it made them look better. This wasn't the actual strike two. That came when it was clear they needed to be separated, so Audrey sent Frito to work at another restaurant owned by our parent company and temporarily demoted Harvey to manager. This tore them apart. They had once been an inseparable evil team, but the pressure of the investigation must have pushed them over the edge. They ended up at each other's throats on Facebook on a public post on the company page. The post had since been deleted, but Thomas explained it as the following. Frito had been pictured in the Facebook post on the restaurant page, and Harvey made a passive-aggressive comment about how Frito shouldn't even be in the picture since he had been moved to another restaurant due to misconduct. Frito saw this comment and said something along the lines of, "At least when people Google my name, I don't show up as the guy that punched his wife," to which Harvey responded, "Very funny from the guy who was cheating on his wife with Janet's sister." Not her real name, but Janet was the girl they appointed to officially supervise my old department after they fired me. The unofficial supervisor, Frito replied to that by saying, "Like you haven't tried with half the waitresses. They all have stories about you trying with them." The post was deleted, but not before it had been seen by Audrey, the auditor. That was officially strike two. Strike three came the next day when Audrey started interviewing the female waitstaff and bartenders, seeing if any of them could confirm that Harvey had tried to make a move on them. All of them were interviewed separately. Several of them had similar stories. Every girl that confirmed Harvey had made a move on them all said he had offered to be their sugar daddy if they would send nudes or stay after closing to fool around with him. Harvey was fired, but that isn't the worst of it. Audrey, the auditor, wasn't just some random woman from corporate. She was the old regional manager for this area and had personally hired Harvey's wife as the general manager of another restaurant in the city. So she called up the restaurant Harvey's wife worked at and told Harvey's wife everything she had learned from the female waitstaff. We learned later that they had gotten a divorce over him trying to cheat on her after she'd already given him a second chance to change after he had beat her. I don't know what compelled her to give him a second chance after something like that, but she sure didn't give him a third. After firing Harvey, the line cook who had given me the food was interviewed by Audrey. I don't know how it came up, but at some point he had let it slip that he was an illegal immigrant. She had his file in her hand with an Illinois ID and social security number on file, so this confused her, and she pressed him for more information. It turns out that Frito had some connections and had his own miniature black market going on where he would have faked social security cards and IDs made for the illegal immigrants he was hiring at reduced wages. It had been going on for at least 4 years. Needless to say, this is a felony, with the potential PR nightmare that she was likely dealing with. She felt she had no choice but to alert the authorities. Local PD enlisted the help of the FBI since some of the evidence led them beyond the jurisdiction of the local police. Frito was arrested and quickly gave up the names of the people working that he had sold social security cards and IDs to. I'm not sure if he gave up all of them, but he did name drop about 14 people, and of the 14, at least half were deported. By the time Thomas had been let go, one of them was the line cook that had given me the food the day I was fired. Thomas went on to explain that it had all started with me being fired, but I never sent that recording to corporate. I only sent it to Dean when he hired me. I asked him about it, and he told me he had sent it to his wife since she was a lawyer. He wanted to see if I had a case to maybe sue my old job since what they had done was wrong. But he also remembered that when we had first talked about it, I had said, I'm not the type of person who would try to make millions off an entire company because of the mistakes of two, but I'd also said that it would be pretty sweet to see them lose their jobs too. So his wife had been the one that sent it to the legal team at the corporate HQ of my old restaurant job. My boss showed it to his wife, who forwarded it to the real head honchos of my old job. They were both just trying to get two scumbags fired for what they did to me, but ended up pulling a thread so long that it didn't end until there were sexual harassment accusations, revelations about managers cheating on their wives with girls related to people they had placed in positions of authority, a divorce, mass layoffs pending investigations, a staff overhaul, an FBI investigation into what could be considered black market dealings of falsified government-issued documents, and at least a half a dozen deportations, and probably as many as 14. I don't know if this counts as nuclear revenge as I didn't actively pursue it, but Thomas ended up showing me that even if it wasn't revenge, it was definitely nuclear and the crater it had left was massive.